The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Oh, we're playing the name game. The name game. We will get into that, what Mayor Bowser said about it yesterday, where things appear to be headed at the moment. A lot of threats from the president so far. No action. We'll talk about that. Stephen A. Smith, shut up. Just shut up. We'll get to what he said coming up in about 20 minutes. And also, NFL Players Association is in complete and utter chaos. I mean, it's not like they've bent the owners over their knees for years, but at this point, oh my God, the owners have to be saying to themselves, these guys are the gang that can't shoot straight. We'll get to their mess and a whole lot more as we roll into what is this today? Tuesday? Yeah, Tuesday morning. And we're waiting to hear from the general manager of the Commanders as well as the head coach. And the number one topic is obviously going to be Terry McLaurin and the contract extension. It was a week ago that he said he was frustrated with where things were, that he and his agent had not heard from the team in a month on that. And I would imagine, I'm just guessing, that Peters will say something to the effect of, we're not going to negotiate publicly. We're doing that behind closed doors. Quinn will say the same thing. Quinn, actually, when he was asked about it during minicamp, said that's the business end of it. You know, I'm not going to deal with that. They'll handle that. And when he gets here, we'll see. But I would say this: my expectation is that Mike, this deal is not done, and that Terry McLaurin does show up. Today is the day that veterans are supposed to report, and tomorrow workouts begin. But I think he's going to hold in, as they call it now. He's going to be there, but he's not going to participate in any drills until they get the contract negotiation worked out. Skipping minicamp, pretty big deal. He could have shown up for that and not participated, but chose not to show up at all. And I never thought it would get to this point with him. But I would also say this, that I think that you have to look at this from a long lens and say, yeah, in the old days, they'd have given him whatever he wanted. You know, Clinton Portis got a third contract, which was just ridiculous. Now they're fiscally responsible, and they're looking at the big picture. And, hey, it's Terry, we love you, and we'd like to sign you to a reasonable contract, but you're going to be 30 years old in September, and we're not going to do something that is going to damage the rest of the football team so that you can be paid among the top 5 receivers when we love you, but we don't believe you're a top 5 receiver. And I think that's going to be really the message that's being delivered to him, and how that lands, we'll have to see. Before we get back into the name situation and what's been going on between the city council and the mayor and the president and everything else that has led us to this point, I did want to talk a little bit about what I did yesterday. And you have heard, I'm sure by now, that Tim Strachan passed away a week or two ago at the age of 49. A remarkable story. One of the top high school quarterbacks in the country in 94 would have been when he would have come out of high school at DeMatha. And in that class, the rankings, as I was told, I'll drop a name here in a minute, but the rankings were Peyton Manning, number 1, Tim Strachan, number 2, Donovan McNabb, number 3, Allen Iverson, number 4. I didn't know that until yesterday. As we know, Manning went on to Tennessee, had a great career there, had an unbelievable career in the NFL, is now in the Hall of Fame. Donovan McNabb went to Syracuse, was the number 2 pick of the draft in 1999, had an excellent borderline Hall of Fame career with Philadelphia, and, things kind of petered out once he got here, although if you look at his numbers for the season he played here, 2010, they're not bad. He got benched at the end of the year, but he threw for a lot of yards. He did. It just didn't fit with what the Shanahans wanted to do, and I think he got another year in Minnesota, and he was out of the league. But it's still a great pro football career. Iverson, I didn't know this. Iverson was a great high school quarterback in Hampton Roads. He didn't play his senior year because he was in jail. Yeah. And, of course, he went to Georgetown to play basketball. He did later say, though, he really wanted to play football at Georgetown. And John Thompson, of course, said, nope, that ain't happening. But at that level, which at that time was called 1AA, can you imagine Allen Iverson, how good he would have been? And you wonder about this, too. As great as he was in basketball, if Allen Iverson was the number 4 prospect coming out of high school and went on to play college football, let's just say that things didn't work out the way they did for his senior year. And if you remember this, he was in a bowling alley and a brawl broke out and chairs were thrown, and he was sent to jail and was later released by Governor, who was it at the time? Douglas Wilder, I believe. And his record was expunged. It was like, it didn't happen. And if all that hadn't happened, plays his senior year, high school football and basketball, does he go someplace and possibly do both? Charlie Ward played both at Florida State, and nowadays I'm sure would have been an NFL quarterback, but in those days there was still the stigma of both the black quarterback and the running quarterback, so he went off and played basketball and had a good NBA career with the Knicks. But you wonder, Iverson, if he would have done that. But anyway, as you probably know, Tim was paralyzed in a diving accident just before his senior year of high school, and took a terrible blow from life, one of the most unimaginable things that could happen. He spent the rest of his life as a quadriplegic, though he did have some use of his arms, and made the most of it. Went to Maryland on a football scholarship, helped coach the quarterbacks, became an analyst on their radio broadcast for 22 years, went to Georgetown Law School, worked as an attorney in the FCC, and was a motivational speaker, had a wife and 3 kids, and packed all of it in 49 years. Absolutely incredible life. And yesterday they had what's called a viewing at DeMatha, and they had hundreds and hundreds of people there, and it was emotional, of course, at times. Among the speakers, James Brown, who got up and said he was asked by the family to talk about the religious part of it. So he wasn't, this wasn't going to snow anybody, that it wasn't going to get up and, talk about sports. He was there to talk about the Lord, which he is very much a part of his life. And he talked about that. And then Johnny Holiday was both funny and poignant about Tim, who he had known for a long time. It was Johnny's suggestion that he help out with sideline reporting during the radio broadcasts, and they were very, very close. In fact, Johnny told a wonderful story about Tim, that when he heard about the accident, and this would have been the summer of 1993, August of 93, Johnny called the hospital in Philadelphia where he was. They had airlifted him there after the accident at the beach, and he wanted to be patched through to the room, hoping to speak to one of Tim's parents. And his mother answered the phone. This was only days after the accident. And his mother answered the phone, and she said, "Oh, he's right here. Would you like to talk to him?" And Johnny said, "Yeah." And so they put him on, and Tim, instead of talking about himself, first question to Johnny was, "How's your golf game?" And Johnny said, "Well, it's okay, I guess." He said, I played today, as a matter of fact." And Tim said, "What'd you shoot?" And Johnny said, 97. And Tim, who had worked as a caddy, I believe, at Columbia, where Johnny plays and Johnny's a member, Tim said, "Well, if you had me as a caddy, you might have gotten it down to a 96. And, that's the kind of person that he was. I mean, just unbelievable courage and grace after horrible tragedy, and absolutely made the most of his life. So that was quite emotional yesterday. Saw a lot of different people from various walks of life, people both in athletics and people involved in DeMatha and other things. Everybody admired Tim Strachan, and to have been a part of his life in a small way. There was a time when we had done some work together that he was interested in doing some broadcasting back at the old station, and he rightly decided to go to law school, Georgetown Law School, where he went on to work as an FCC attorney. But, when you think about, by the grace of God, how many times have you done something like what he did in 1993, simply jump in the surf to cool off, and come out of it fine, and he winds up with a life-altering injury. So, best to his family. It was an open casket, which is something that was, difficult for me to deal with, but that was seemingly part of what the procedure was yesterday, and, to have seen that was amazing. But the name I would drop would be Mark Duffner. And Mark Duffner was there. If you remember, Mark Duffner was the head football coach at Maryland at the time. Tim Strachan was there just before Strachan got there, and he lasted, I guess, 2 or 3 years after that. Like, he was here for 4 or 5 years. He's from Annandale. He's from the area. He had coached at Holy Cross before, had been very successful. And after Maryland, stayed in the NFL ever since. I mean, this is like close to 30 years back in the NFL, and just recently he was not renewed by the Cincinnati Bengals, and he said he's going to retire. He bought a house in Jacksonville when he was coaching there, and that's where he and his family are going to retire. He's 72 years old, and he said 50 years in football is probably going to be enough. But when we're talking about Tim, he said, I've been around a lot of great quarterbacks. And if you watch the new Netflix series, you'll see him briefly when they're doing the Bengals. Joe Burrow is one of the quarterbacks. In fact, he said, I wish they hadn't used my profanity. I said, well, it was on a streaming service, Netflix. They have a lot of liberty with that. But we talked about Burrow in relation to Tim. And he said, this is a special guy in Burrow. And Tim was that guy, too. He recruited him heavily to go to Maryland. Tim eventually signed a scholarship to go to Penn State, but after the accident, decided that he would be better off staying closer to home. So Duffner honored the scholarship. He brought him in on a full scholarship at Maryland in football, even though he couldn't play, obviously. But he said he was one of those special people that could really grasp the game in a way that few can. And he saw it in the meeting rooms when he had Tim working with the quarterbacks at the school. And he said, if this horrible thing hadn't happened, that, it's quite possible that Tim would have been a quarterback at the level of Peyton Manning and Donovan McNabb and some of the others who are of that class, but other classes as well. And we never got to find out. But we talked about his character, and you look at great quarterbacks, character is a big part of it. And I said, sometimes in life, the greatness that you achieve isn't something that you would not have expected. And if you would have looked at a 17-year-old Tim Strachan prior to August of 1993, you would have predicted his greatness would be on the football field, both in college and possibly even in the pros. And we never even got to see him play his senior year of high school because of this. And what he did in taking that terrible thing and using what he had learned to become a great high school quarterback, to be that highly recruited coming out of your junior year, he used that in his life to take on the game of life every day and kick its butt. And everything that he accomplished in life is the dream of anyone able-bodied. And to think that he did this in a wheelchair is absolutely remarkable. So I was really moved by that yesterday, and just wanted to pass along a few thoughts about what that was like to be there. And the DeMatha community is very tight. People like James Brown, who went there, was a great basketball player, class of 1969, has remained close to the school. You saw many of the alumni there, people who didn't necessarily know Tim, but knew his story. They felt the closeness to him, and they felt a kinship to someone who had achieved greatness coming out of their school. And the school president spoke. There was a number of songs that were played, a trio which included, I think, one of Tim's nephews. They did American Pie at the end. It was just absolutely tremendous. So today will be the funeral at Holy Redeemer Church. I would imagine there will be standing room only for that, and then the burial of, I think, one of the great people who have ever lived in the Washington, D.C. area. At one point, he was named Washingtonian of the Year, and to think that in a day where his life instantly changed and change to a point where some might say, well, that's going to be the rest of your life in a wheelchair and there's not that much else you can do. He said, the hell with that, and went on with his life and accomplished things that people, again, who are able-bodied only dream of. So rest in peace, Tim, and to all those who are close to him. A great loss is felt with him passing on. All right, I meant to get to the name stuff here. I'm going to take a little break here, and we'll get to that. What Josh Harris said several months ago and what the mayor said yesterday regarding the pressure from the president to change the name, or he could interfere with the stadium deal getting done. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Well, don't we have an interesting waltz going on with the President of the United States of America, the Mayor of Washington, D.C., and the Washington Commanders football team, as we wait to see what the city council is going to do with the deal that was put together between the team and the mayor, where the team is going to put up $2.7 billion plus cost overruns, while the city is to put up $1 billion, and that needs city council approval, which was supposed to take place on July 15th, but is not, and there are going to be public hearings on this next week, in fact, a week from today and a week from tomorrow. And then the city council goes into recess in August, so it's possible this vote doesn't even take place until September. Meantime, the team is drumming their fingers on the table like, hey, we've got to get this deal done because we want to make some deals, like to bring the Women's World Cup here in 2031 and concerts and things like that. So we've got to do this. Let's do this. But everybody's dragging their feet on it. And meantime, with, I guess, nothing to do, on Sunday, the president decides to insert himself into this and say, oh, yeah, if this team doesn't change its name, I'm going to make it difficult for them to build the stadium. He didn't specify what exactly he would do, and so far he hasn't done anything, hasn't told the mayor he's going to do anything, but this is what Trump does. He makes threats, and sometimes he follows through, and sometimes he doesn't. Right now, Canada is not the 51st state. Okay, so a lot of noise, not a lot of action so far. So let's set this up. This goes back to February. This was Josh Harris, the owner of the team, with his end-of-season news conference, and this question.
Is it safe to say the Commander's name is around just to stay? Is that safe to say from your standpoint?
Yes. And we're actually, I think it's now being embraced by our team, by our culture, by our coaching staff. And so, we're going with that.
So that was February. Commanders, there to stay. They make the deal with the city in April. They have the commissioner of the NFL, Roger Goodell, there with the announcement, and the president of the United States of America, Donald Trump, there. Now, in making this deal, there was no stipulation at that time in April that the team change its name back to Redskins. And there was no demand from the president that happened, but he was sort of nudging in that direction.
They told us they don't know why these names are being taken off. They're trying to, I think it's degrading to the Indian population, and it's a great population, and they like when they're, called by various names. Now, Washington, the Redskins, perhaps that's a little bit different, but I can tell you that I spoke to people of Indian heritage that love that name and they love that team, and I think it's a superior name to what they have right now, and it had heritage behind it. It had something special.
In fact, he's right about that part. It had something special behind it. It had heritage, and there are Native Americans who liked the name and did not want it removed. But the fact of the matter is, the owner of the team said, we've moved on here. We went through all this. Even when I took over as the owner of the team, I allowed for the possibility that the name would change, maybe not back to Redskins, but it would change from Commanders. We had a great season. At the end of the season, I said, nah, that's it. We're going to stick with Commanders. And the polling that's been done by the Washington Post has pushed it very much in its favor. It seems like the fan base, while there are many who are still disgruntled by the fact that it's not Redskins, they moved on. They've turned the page on that. But now the page got turned back by the President of the United States. Yesterday, Muriel Bowser, in a news conference, said this about the Trump butting in and the deal, which still needs approval from the city council.
What I'm concerned about is we haven't done our part. And so we need to complete our part so that the team can get to work, so that local businesses can get hired, so that we can start earning the tax revenue that will come when we deliver the Commander Stadium.
Okay. And this question, which you'll hear, has her rather annoyed, but I think the answer might be telling.
If they changed the name back for any reason, would that change your position on bringing the stadium back to D.C.?
No, it wouldn't.
It would not change
You heard me, Eric. I asked, please don't ask, please. You asked the question, I answered it. Don't badger me.
So she's rather annoyed by this, and maybe rightfully so. Now, remember, for years and years, there was talk about bringing the team back to the district, but one of the stipulations was they needed to change the name. And I think Bowser knew, however she felt about the name, that this was not going to get approval from the city council as Redskins. There were too many people who were opposed to the name. And ultimately, the name did change, not because Dan Snyder finally got religion or something like that. It was his stupidity. He tried to stiff his partners out of their dividends for the team using the pandemic as an excuse. And the late Fred Smith, the chairman of FedEx, said, oh, yeah, watch this. If you don't change your name, we're going to remove our sponsorship, and Pepsi and Nike are ready to fall in line with us. So Snyder caved, the name changed, and here we are. And it looked like, as Bowser said yesterday, we're at the 1 yard line here. And the president, it's like Frankie Louvu jumping off sides on the tush push, and we're holding things up. And there's no referee to say, hey, Frankie, if you keep jumping over the line, we're going to just give you a touchdown here. No, that's not what's at play here. So that's the setup. Mike Florio suggested several weeks ago that Trump could insert himself the way he did, could maybe force a name change. I mean, this has been talked about. Tom Lavero wrote about this months ago as well. So this was Florio yesterday on the follow-up for this. And as you heard, Bowser commented, the president commented on social media over the weekend, nothing from the team so far. And I don't think, I'm sure it's going to be asked today of Adam Peters. I don't think he's going to have any comment on it, nor Dan Quinn. But this was Florio yesterday on his podcast and where he is on research on this.
I sent 2 emails yesterday to multiple PR people who are handling this thing for the Commanders, specifically handling this issue. No response to 2 different emails. NFL, no response to 2 different emails. Look, I understand that they're trying to tiptoe very gingerly with the president. They don't want the president to direct an executive order at the NFL. We've seen it with the Rooney Rule and diversity efforts. Just trying to tiptoe. No sudden moves. Let's not become the focal point. We've seen what happens to the other entities that have become the focal point of the president's attention. We don't want that. We're not going to say anything. We've already got his attention. He's saying immediately change the name. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to do it or are you not going to do it? Are you going to stand up and say we're not going to do it? Or are you just going to act like it never happened? Are you going to hide under the bed and just pretend that it never occurred and hope that everyone moves on and hope that the president moves on to something else? I assume that's what they're doing, but I still think at some level, I think Josh Harris would kind of like to go back to the old name. I think he would. He knows he can't say it. And as I've said in the past, having the president basically demand it, man, that provides cover. Hey, I didn't want to go back to the old name, but this is the only way we're getting a stadium. So we got to choose between Commanders or DC Stadium. And we only get the DC Stadium if we go back to the old name. I guess we got to go back to the old name because we want the DC Stadium. Regardless, at some point, they need to say something because it does seem like the Commanders are being cowardly, that they're afraid of the reaction. They're afraid of what the president may say. They're afraid of this, afraid of that. We've got too many people who are afraid nowadays. Everyone's afraid. Nobody wants to speak the truth because we're afraid of the consequences.
Well, the Guardians were not afraid. Trump also said over the weekend that the Guardians should change their name back to Indians, and the Guardians said, no, we're not going to do that. But they're in a different situation. They've got a stadium. They got a stadium that was built around the time of Camden Yards, and it's still a really good stadium. There's no problem with where the Guardians play. That's not the case with Washington. They're trying to get this deal through. Harris, as Florio suggests, could say, hey, we've moved on from this, Mr. President. We're going to be the Commanders. I said that back in February. We're not going to entertain those thoughts. And if you want to prevent us from having a stadium in Washington, D.C., so be it. I don't know if he's going to say that. And as Tom Libero points out in his column today, Harris has a relationship with Trump. He's been a financial donor and, according to the New York Times, made regular visits in 2017 to the White House to advise administration officials on infrastructure policy. So I don't think that he's going to lash back at Trump. The silent treatment, I don't know how long that can last. The other thing about Trump and the NFL that you have to realize, remember, he's got it out for the NFL. He got embarrassed 40 years ago when he lost his suit with the USFL as they tried to sue the NFL. And they actually did beat the NFL on the antitrust, but the damages of $1 trebled to $3 wasn't enough to save the league. And then he tried to buy the Buffalo Bills, and he had been told in the past that there was no way that the owners were going to approve him. He tried to buy the Bills, and he was turned down. So he's got it out for the league. So he's, and we know about Trump and revenge. And if he can screw things up, he doesn't care. And he may screw things up to the point where this deal doesn't happen and they have to build a new stadium in Maryland. I don't think that's going to happen, but that's always a possibility, and I don't think it would bother Trump if that happened. Now, as far as further comments from Mayor Bowser, she talked to John Keim of ESPN yesterday, and she said, this is what I believe. I've had the opportunity to speak on a couple of different occasions with the president about this site and about our team. And I can say this without equivocation. He is a Jaden Daniels fan, and he said himself at the presser we were at that this is probably the best site of any site he's seen for a stadium. I have to think that's what I heard him say, and that's what we'll stick with. So essentially she's saying, he's already said this is the best thing that can happen. The league has said that. The presence of the commissioner, Roger Goodell, at this news conference said a lot about that. So it could be just bluster. It could be just, Epstein, interference, or Epstein, try and blow it the other way, things like that. She also said yesterday, let me be clear, we're on the 1 yard line and it's time to get over the line. I can't imagine having to start over on this. There's nobody waiting in the wings with $2.7 billion. And so this stadium is a catalyst. It will attract other investments. Any impediment to getting it done should be discouraged. When you're on the 1 yard line, you need to carry it over, right? That's all you want. No fumbles, no interceptions. Let's get it over the line. And that's what we're focused on. Yeah, she's trying to focus on it, but there's all this bluster and stuff coming out of the White House. Now, the Post did an analysis of what Trump can and can't do on this. Doesn't mean he can't screw this up, but remember this, the deal that was made is that the city controls the land, not the federal government. It's not to say he couldn't, cause problems, but as they lay it out here, Trump could not unilaterally derail the Washington Commanders deal. A federal law passed by Congress in December expressly gives D.C. control of the land and allows the city to develop a stadium there, and any prohibition on stadium development would require another act of Congress. But Trump's mercurial nature and tendency to insert himself into these unlikely places, Coca-Cola's recipe, the resignation of the University of Virginia's president, have made his presidency and influence unpredictable. He says, while D.C. administrative control of the land, the federal government still has some involvement in the planning process, including through the Department of the Interior, which is the city has to strike an agreement on those responsible and to mitigate environmental hazards on the land. Though the nation's capital planning commission would review the design of development, Trump appointed half of its members. There you go. The federal government could not cancel D.C.'s control of the land unless the district violates the law of the land restrictions, though then even D.C. would have 90 days to correct it. So there are things that he could do, but the way it's set up, he's not supposed to be able to do some of those. So where this goes, I don't know. But I would say that this is going to blow over. My guess is that this is just a lot of wind, a lot of noise, and eventually this stadium deal is going to get done. And, whatever the presidential interference on this, we'll have to see where that goes. But I would hope that these public hearings that take place next week lead to a vote September or maybe earlier than that, and we just move on from this. And the stipulation that they change the name will just go away because they'll already have a stadium deal and they'll have a deal as the Commanders. I don't think that the team wants to go through this mishigas again, and I know the league doesn't want to go through this again. The league, we're having to change back. I mean, there's a point that Florio makes there that Josh Harris, as a Trump supporter and a businessman, says to himself, it wouldn't be the worst thing if we were the Redskins again. I can't say we want to be the Redskins, but, if the president takes it out of our hands, okay. Yeah, I just don't see that happening. Let me get to Stephen A. Smith here while we're talking stadium. Stephen A. Smith is paid a lot of money by ESPN, reportedly about $20 million a year, to constantly bloviate about things he often knows nothing about, in particular football. I believe he knows something about the NBA, but everything else he inserts himself into, it's just loud. It's just a lot of noise. It doesn't make it right, just makes it noisy. So he got in on the stadium stuff yesterday. He said that Trump is trying to distract from Epstein by all this, and that's a belief that's shared by a lot of people. But he also said this. This is the Stephen A. solution to the stadium mess that's going on right now. The deal that, as the mayor described, is on the 1 yard line. $2.7 billion from the team, $1 billion from the city. The deal gets done. The stadium opens in 2030. No. The great $20 million a year Stephen A. Smith, who always has the answer to everything, and I'm sure has thoroughly researched this, has come up with this solution.
I've been an advocate, a strong advocate. I've always wanted a stadium in the state of Maryland that the Ravens and the Washington Commanders could share with a lot of employment emanating from D.C., but still be able to, because, again, you wouldn't have to worry about stuff like this. That's just my personal opinion. That was the idea that I threw out last year, that the Ravens and the Commanders should actually share stadium. You got a minimum of 17 to 18 weeks where you got games there, plus playoff games and all of that stuff, plus events in the offseason. And you know what? And it's the state of Maryland that you have to deal with instead of this kind of nonsense.
Okay. You have absolutely, positively no idea what you're talking about. And your foolishness is covered up by your bluster. Okay, let's examine a couple of things. Number one, each team has a stadium in the state of Maryland. The Ravens have a stadium that they actually like, which the state of Maryland has committed to spending $500 million to make better. Nobody in Baltimore doesn't like the stadium that they're in. Nobody in Baltimore is saying, we need to move out of here so we can share a stadium with the other team and have it further away from where it is now in a perfect location in downtown Baltimore. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the Commanders are in Maryland. They don't want to be in Maryland. They want to be back in D.C. And this stupid idea that you're floating here, Stephen A., and floating it as, I'm really smart. I got all the solutions here. Jack Kent Cooke, going back to the early 80s, more than a decade before he made the deal that everybody as a fan regrets, building the stadium in Landover, Maryland, Jack Kent Cooke was trying to get a stadium built in Laurel that the Redskins and the Baltimore Colts would share. That idea really never got off the ground because, neither fan base was really interested in it. The Colts were still playing in Memorial Stadium, which was aging, but, they were not necessarily looking to move out. Bob Irsay just made himself a sweetheart deal to move the team to Indianapolis. but that was not a factor. So that your stupid, idiotic idea, which you know nothing about, was floated over 40 years ago by the owner of the Redskins, and it never happened. And the people in Baltimore do not want to share a stadium with the or with the Commanders, whatever they ultimately will be called. And they are happy where they are, especially with money coming in from the state to fix it up. So this shared stadium idea where everybody would have to schlep to someplace like Laurel is stupid. It's loud, but it's really stupid. And Stephen A., they pay you $20 million a year to come up with those kind of idiotic thoughts. It's a good country. It really is. Guy Gesund. Yeah, I'm sure every time you go to the bank, you smile. But keep coming up with that stupid nonsense because it makes us all smile here. Way to go, Stephen, especially when it comes to football. This is a guy, by the way, who some years ago, after the Jets had missed the field goal, trying it on third down at the end of the game, suggested that since they missed the field goal on third down, they should try it again on fourth down. He didn't even know the rules of the game. And now he knows. He's the all-knower on stadiums. Amazing. Coming up, we'll get to more on the name of the team. Von Miller showed up yesterday to sign his contract, and he's going to wear number 24. Interesting reason why he's wearing 24, and I'll talk about the irony of wearing number 24 as well as we continue. It's the Andy Poland Show, ESPN 630. We're about half an hour away from a news conference with the general manager of the Commanders, Adam Peters, and the coach of the team, Dan Quinn. So if anything newsworthy happens between 10:30 and when we scoot over at 11 o'clock, I will pass it on. Obviously, question number one is going to be about Terry McLaurin and the status of the contract negotiations on an extension. I don't imagine, if there's nothing to report, that they will have anything insightful to say other than we're working behind closed doors and we're going to leave that out of the media. But that's what people want to know about. Also, Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones, general manager of the Cowboys, with some interesting things to say about the Micah Parsons contract negotiations. He is in the same boat as Terry McLaurin, and actually he is now holding in. Cowboy veterans were due to report yesterday. Micah Parsons did show up, but is not going to participate in the workouts until they get a contract extended. Doesn't sound like Jerry's in any big fat hurry to do that. But let me start with Von Miller. Von Miller, as you know, signed the other day by Washington. It's a contract with incentives that could pay something like $8 to $10 million. I don't know what the number is, but they're hoping to get some snaps out of him. He's not going to be a full-time player, and the real value is going to come in the postseason, they say. I mean, it's interesting, sign a guy in July for what he can do for you in January, but okay, that's the way things are, and he has been productive where he's been. He had limited snaps last year, still had 6 sacks, was at one time one of the most feared pass rushers in the NBA and NFL, and may have something left in the tank at the age of 36. But yesterday, showing up in Ashburn, asked why he picked Washington to sign with.
It all started with the potential of this team. I had felt like I had known Dan Quinn for a long time, and I had just met him a month and a half ago.
Wow.
But I had felt like I had been knowing him. All the guys that have played for him, they rave about him. They love him, and when I was presented with the opportunity to come here, I couldn't resist, man. And this team has a lot of potential, and I just wanted to add to that. I just wanted to be a part of the culture. I'm a team guy. I don't like to toot my own horn, but when it comes to being one of the guys, like I'm the best at it. I'm the best at blending in. I'm the best at getting the guys together, vibing with the guys, bringing the locker room together. Like I'm the best at that. It ain't nobody around the league that do that better than me. And, I've heard about this team and the type of culture they have, and I wanted to add to that.
That is such a refreshing thing to hear. I heard about this team and the culture that they have, and I wanted to add to that. For 25 years, nobody wanted to come here because of the culture. If you came here, it was for money. That's generally the way it worked. By the way, meant to pass this along. Sports Illustrated did the best players of the first 25 years of this century, players who played between 2000 and 2024, those 25 years. Some obvious ones. Tom Brady's the quarterback, and you can go on and on, certain ones that are obvious. So I was looking for Washington connections, and this is one of the biggest indictments of the Snyder era, which roughly covers that area. He took over as the owner in 1999 and was forced to sell in 2023. So it's pretty much that 24-year period that overlaps, most of the first quarter century of this century. So here are the Washington connections. Second-team running back Adrian Peterson. Well, he's not on the list because of what he did in Washington. It's because of what he did with the Minnesota Vikings. The first-team running back is LaDainian Tomlinson. The tackles, Trent Williams, second team. That's an interesting one. That could be a 50-50 split, but I think of him more now for San Francisco. He's been to a couple of Super Bowls with them, so I think it's more for his years in San Francisco. But, okay, there is a Washington connection there. Joe Thomas and Jonathan Ogden are the first-team tackles. Linebacker, London Fletcher. London Fletcher did play the back half of his career here. That's, I think, more of a split, though, because he had the first half of his career with St. Louis, where he won a Super Bowl, and Buffalo. So it's not all Washington there. The linebackers are Ray Lewis and Bobby Wagner. And, yes, Bobby Wagner is Washington, but he's on this list for Seattle. Then the cornerbacks, Champ Bailey, second team. Darrelle Revis and Charles Woodson are the first-team cornerbacks. The safety. This is the one player on the list that you could say was all Washington, but tragically he had only a 3.5-year career because he was murdered. That's Sean Taylor, and he's listed as among those getting votes at safety. Ed Reed and Troy Polamalu are the first-team safeties. The punter, you would think, because there were years when Tress Way was the most valuable player on this team. The punter is Shane Leckler. No votes for Tress Way. So really, you look at all the players named to this, and they go first team, second team, honorable mention, the whole thing, and only one guy that you could say, yes, he's on there definitely because of Washington, and that's Sean Taylor, only because he played all of his career with Washington, though it was very short. The others that would be up in the air would be Trent Williams and London Fletcher, and I don't think Champ Bailey would register here because he spent 10 years playing in Denver, and that's why he's in the Hall of Fame for his Denver years. And it's part of the reason that Von Miller says that he is wearing number 24.
58 was gone, 40 was gone. So
okay, all right.
And then five is obviously gone. Yeah. But those are the only numbers that I've worn, throughout my whole football career. I wore 24 one time in college. One of my DeSoto alumni, he had got injured in practice. And he was paralyzed from, neck down, and his number was 24. And I wore it for one game, in support of him, Corey Bonner, in college. It was my junior year. It was my junior year in college, and I wore 24 in the game versus Arkansas at Texas Stadium, and it just spoke to me too. I'm a huge Kobe fan as well, and that number just spoke to me, and they told me about 58 being gone, 40 was gone, so 24 was just next, and it just kind of spoke to me. And obviously I play with Champ Bailey, huge fan of Champ Bailey, and when he was here, he was 24 too. So it was a lot of things that kind of just tied me to that number, and that's the number that I'm gonna wear when I get here.
And that's the number that he put up on Instagram when he announced his signing. The irony of wearing 24. And you could almost look at this like, oh, yeah, this is like a sign of the page being turned. Champ Bailey never should have left here. There were some extenuating circumstances, one of which I was told that his wife said, you need to leave Washington or I'm going to divorce you. So he knew that the next contract he was going to sign, he was going to give up a lot of it. So he wound up going to Denver. She was okay with that. But they traded him for Clinton Portis, and I believe they threw in a third-round pick, which was just so stupid. It was just idiotic. Running backs, as Mike Shanahan said, you can get them. Hall of Fame corners, they're tough to come by. And so, at least for a year, and I think that could be all he plays here, Von Miller is in some ways a reminder of just how much dysfunction was here. How when you look at the 25-year team, the first quarter-century team of the NFL by SI, while there's so few players from the Dan Snyder era on it, even though they were drafting near the top of the draft every year because they stunk. And when you look at Von Miller wearing number 24, you look at maybe a number that signifies just how much of a mess this organization was for the 24 years of Dan Snyder. Also, the 24 is significant there, right? How many years did Snyder own the team? 24 years. So I think that's really symbolic. I wonder if he was nudged in a different direction. Like, yeah, it's kind of a reminder of how much of a mess things were. Maybe you want to pick something else. I don't know. Things change. You used to be a linebacker, couldn't wear 24, but they've changed the rules on that. So he will be number 24, which generally goes to like a safety or a cornerback. But that's the number that we're going to see Von Miller in. Albert Breer yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show. Albert Breer of SI.com, not discussing the quarter-century team, but discussing the situation with the name of the team. And we've discussed that where yesterday Muriel Bowser said that if the name did in fact change back to Redskins, it would not hold up a deal, but she's not focused on that. She wants to get this through. The president saying that he could interfere. I mean, she would like to see this deal approved by the city council. That's what her focus is right now. This is Breer from the team side of it, and so far, maybe we're going to hear something from Adam Peters in about 20 minutes, but so far the team has not commented on this, but this is Breer's take in talking to people over the past few years in regards to the name.
When I've talked to Commanders people about this over the last couple of years, every time I go to them, it's like, that's not even, we haven't even discussed that. That's not even something that we would bring up, you know? And so, if those conversations are happening in the Commanders organization, they are at a very high level and they're being kept very, very quiet. I would be surprised just because I think it would be a reaction to what's happening in the here and the now. And I think it would be asking for another problem to come up in 5 or 10 years after everything that they went through. And after all that they endured over the last 20 years in the fight over that name, by going back to the name, I think you would be sort of inviting that same conversation to crop up. Now, maybe it would be okay at first, but you'd be inviting that conversation to crop back up very, very quickly. And I think there are ways that, that Josh Harris and his ownership group and Adam Peters and Dan Quinn can celebrate their past, can celebrate the history of the franchise, can honor the history of the franchise without going back to that name. And I'm saying that without presenting my own opinion on it. But I just think going back to that name might help you in certain ways today, but I think you'd be creating another long-term problem for yourself. And I just haven't sensed any appetite within the organization to go there.
Yeah, the only reason why it probably doesn't go away, like the Guardians, the Cleveland Guardians, they're not going back to the Indians. I think they've already said they're not. But there's no stadium involved in this. The Commanders, there's a stadium involved in this, and that's why I don't know if the president gets involved in that, gets his hands dirty in saying, hey, I can hold up this stadium situation here.
And I would on the flip side to kind of get behind your point a little bit. Donald Trump did that photo op with Roger Goodell and Josh Harris in the Oval Office in May to announce the draft is coming to Washington in 2027. So I just kind of thought to myself, that looks funny. What's going on there? And so I started Googling, I Googled Goodell Trump. I Googled Goodell Biden. I Googled Goodell Obama. I Googled Goodell Bush. And then finally, I found a picture of George W. Bush and Paul Tagliabue in 2003. promoting the kickoff game being in Washington. They did a photo op to promote, I think it was the Redskins and the Jets at the time, playing in the kickoff game. So it had been 22 years since a sitting president did a photo op with an NFL commissioner. And it was right around the time when the Pete Rose stuff was going on in baseball. And so, I think there's some speculation that could be tied to the Justice Department and the ESPN NFL Network merger. And would Donald Trump put his thumb on the scale one way or the other? It does seem like he's trying, like President Trump is trying to involve himself in sports on a bunch of different levels. And so, I think that's the one reason why you look at this and you say, maybe that will put some pressure on the Commanders to do something here, because it is such a big deal getting a new stadium built. I have a hard time seeing them going back, but stranger things have happened.
Yeah, I remember when I saw that the commissioner of Major League Baseball, Rob Manfred, was meeting with Donald Trump, and they were going to talk about Pete Rose. And I said on the air, Pete Rose is going to get on the ballot again. He will get on the ballot. Now, have I learned some things behind the scenes with that? I have. I just I have to be careful with that because I want a second source on this. But, what the president was suggesting to the commissioner, that, these things could happen. We need to have this happen. And look, it's a victory lap for the president because everybody's going to go, yeah, Pete should be in the Hall of Fame. I think we can all agree should be in the Hall of Fame, or at least put him on the ballot if you want to. But that's why I'm just curious of the logic, the angle of this with the Commanders and also the Guardians.
And is this just distraction from Jeffrey Epstein? We don't know, but the fact of the matter is that Trump hasn't had any trouble inserting himself in these kind of things. The Guardians have already said, forget it, we're not going back to Indians. But the Commanders are in a different situation. And also, you've got to find out more about the relationship between Josh Harris and the president, and he has been a supporter of him in the past, advising the White House going back to 2017. So the silence from Ashburn has been deafening at this point. And I don't know, 48 hours now, right? This came out Sunday, so we're 48 hours into this, whether we're going to hear anything today. But something has to be said one way or another, like, oh, okay, the president has inserted himself. We'll see where this goes, or forget it. And going back to, again, what Harris said back in February.
Is it safe to say the Commander's name is around just to stay? Is that safe to say from your standpoint?
Yes. And we're actually, I think it's now being embraced by our team, by our culture, by our coaching staff. And so, we're going with that.
Josh Harris in February, Josh Harris in July. We'll have to see. NFL Players Association. Oy Gewalt, what a mess. Lloyd Howell has not only resigned as the executive director of the NFL Players Association, the president, J.C. Treader, former player, has resigned. He's not going to hold another position with them. And the latest is that Howell has resigned from his consulting job at the Carlyle Group, which is what helped to fuel his departure from the NFL Players Association, because there was a conflict of interest as he was seeking out private equity firms for NFL teams and consulting with the Carlyle Group. So in other words, he was working for the NFL at the same time he was working for the Players Association. And the one who got the ball rolling on this was Pablo Torre. On his podcast, Pablo Torre finds out, he got him a hold of a 61-page document which showed that there had been a suit filed by the Players Association against the NFL owners for collusion, because they had closed ranks after the Deshaun Watson deal with Cleveland, guaranteeing them all the money, and they agreed moving forward that they as a group were not going to guarantee money for future big contracts. And there was an exchange between Michael Bidwell, who's the owner of the Cardinals, and the owner of the San Diego Chargers, or not, the Los Angeles Chargers, Dean Spanos, in which Spanos was patting on the back Michael Bidwell for not giving Kyler Murray a fully guaranteed contract full of incentives. They had evidence there, but the arbitrator threw it out, saying that they didn't have enough evidence to make a ruling, yet there was clearly grounds for an appeal, which the Players Association never found out about it. that opened the door for all this fallout of this, and now the Players Association doesn't have an executive director and doesn't have a team president. Tony and Pablo unpacking all this yesterday on PTI.
First, Lloyd Howell resigned, and now we have J.C. Tretter, who worked closely with Howell, resigning as well, and saying he is withdrawing from any further consideration for any position in the NFLPA. Pablo, in the stories that I've read, you are receiving credit for your investigative work on this particular story. So what do you make of Tretter's resignation?
That it was inevitable, that when you were the guy who oversaw the process that installed Lloyd Howell, who had a part-time consultant role with the Carlyle Group, a private equity firm that is in business now, has the capacity to be in business out with the NFL, that is a problem. When Lloyd Howell also was complicit in what is described by the government as one of the largest federal fraud settlements in American history, when he was the CFO of Booz Allen, that is a problem. Tony, I can go on and on. Just know it's even worse when you don't even necessarily know that when you hire the guy. And so J.C. Tretter was the guy who oversaw the selection process of the executive director of the union. And so briefly what I did was I found these two arbitration rulings that were suppressed between the NFL and the NFLPA. And the question, of course, is why? Why did they suppress them? And what I outline too exhaustively for us to talk about here, is that J.C. Tretter had an interest in preserving his reputation. He was implicated, certainly in the second ruling. And also, he wanted the long-term job that he gave to Lloyd Howell, really as a stopgap for the time being, again, in the present tense.
So I have some questions, because I'm not steeped in this. And it all comes back to you, so I should ask you these questions. How, in fact, could the NFLPA put these two guys at the top of the chart? I had read that at one point the executive board of the NFLPA voted 10-1 not to extend an offer to Howell to hire him. Then they didn't tell the player reps because they didn't want them to walk into a room with prejudice. But why did the player reps then hire Howell? And this is chaos. What happens to the NFLPA, a very respected institution? What happens to them?
Yes. Gene Upshaw's NFLPA, Tony, has been disgraced by this entire saga. And so the second part first, what they need to do is figure out, is there anybody in the building who, when they witnessed any of this happening, stood up and said something? Who blew the whistle? And if the answer is there is nobody who could do that, who could take over for this union as the interim executive director, then you got to clean house and you got to go outside. And as for how this happened, how did, in fact, the 10-1 vote reported in the Washington Post and elsewhere become this giant mess? This is what I'm reporting still today. I looked to find out how close was the vote for Lloyd Howell. No one said anything during my reporting. Now when Lloyd Howell is gone, everyone's saying, whoa. We didn't want that guy. It was 10-1. But one more detail that's very important to know. One last detail is that when J.C. Tretter was overseeing the process of electing this executive director, there was an amendment to the Constitution in which the board, those reps, could not know the identity of the candidates until the day they had to show up to begin the voting process. It used to be 30 days. You could vet everybody. Then it became, you got to show up, then you'll find out. Why were they secretive is another relevant question.
That's like walking in November in the presidential election and not knowing who's running. I mean, come on.
Yeah, and look, it looks like the players were essentially railroaded by the combination of Lloyd Howell and J.C. Tretter, both of whom are now gone from the Players Association. And while it's easy to blame them, you also have to look at the players. And I think this is a problem that they have in the Players Association is they're not paying attention to the issues. It used to be that you had active union membership. This has been helpful in baseball, that they keep the players informed. And in baseball, the Players Association has always been able to close ranks, and they stay together, and they win all the time. The players always lose in football. And I think they've gotten to the point where, we're going to lose, but let's make as much money as we can. And they don't want work stoppages. We had one in 2011, and there was chaos going on then. We had players who were borrowing like $500,000 at 20% interest. It was drowning them. They had to get back to work, and they agreed to do it, and the owners got what they wanted. And that's probably going to happen here again. But at least in your representation, have somebody who's got your best interests in mind, not their own interests, as it appears that Lloyd Howell did. where he's working a side hustle, basically with the owners, with the Carlyle Group, looking for private equity investments. And on the other hand, he's also with the Players Association, apparently being shuffled through by J.C. Tretter, who figured he would get special treatment with Lloyd Howell in charge and would eventually replace Howell when he left. Too many interests involved here. So there's got to be stronger leadership, and there's got to be somebody who's got to take the bull by the horns and say, hey, we're still behind the eight ball here. We're the only major sports league that doesn't have guaranteed contracts, and we need to have some type of protection here. And we also can't have collusion, which has apparently been going on here, where you had this document that was buried by both the Players Association and the NFL owners, this 61-page document, which showed that there was, in fact, collusion by the owners to prevent guaranteed salaries. The Players Association knew about it. They didn't file an appeal on it. Part of the reason they didn't file an appeal on it was J.C. Tretter was found with text messages ripping Russell Wilson for caving in and signing a contract that was non-guaranteed with the Denver Broncos. This is a mess. Somebody needs to get their arms around this, and it's got to be somebody with strong control. They had that with DeMar Smith, who was an attorney. But DeMar Smith could only do so much. They eventually forced him out. They wound up with leadership, which has turned out to be an absolute mess. And I don't know where they go from here. I mean, you've got big money deals that have to be negotiated. The media rights deal could be opened up in 2029, so that's 4 years from now. And the players got to make sure they get their fair share of this. Now, they do get, a portion of the revenue. I think it's up to 50% or 55%, whatever it is. But the owners have them over a barrel on this, and these contracts, which were flirting with guarantees, which the owners didn't want, they managed to get together and make sure that it didn't happen with virtually no resistance from the Players Association. This happened in baseball 40 years ago, and there was in fact collusion proved. The players got damages on that. Will the NFL players get damages on this? I don't think so, because they can't stay together. They can't even decide who they're going to vote for, and they don't even care who they're voting for. And as Pablo Torre points out, they find out who they're voting for the day they show up. You can't have that. You just can't have it. And we've had work stoppages before in the NFL. I don't think we'll ever have one again because there's just too much money. But man, what an absolute mess that is. We wait to see. The big waiting game continues to go on, because if there were news to report, if there was something to say, I'm sure they would have either put out a release just before the Peters news conference today, or Peters would have opened up and said, our long national nightmare is over. Terry McLaurin has just signed a 3-year extension, or whatever it's going to be. But we are off and running with training camp. I will have highlights to play from the news conference tomorrow, and we'll see what is said by Dan Quinn and Adam Peters and kind of parse through that. I am also, rare weeknight out for Andy, heading to the Reds game tonight. Reds and the Nationals at Nats Park, so I have a little to say about that coming up tomorrow. Looking forward to that. And looking forward to being here tomorrow. I'm going to take Thursday and Friday off this week. I'm going to take a couple days off. My kids are coming in from Seattle. I want to see them. But otherwise, I will see you back here tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bram is coming up next.